I'm Dan Johnson, Director of Department of Transportation and Development at Clackamas County. Welcome to an orientation with Clackamas County's Climate Action Planning process. This presentation is intended to give our community and leaders at Clackamas County a summary of the project structure and an opportunity to meet the consultant team that will be coordinating the work. One of the key goals identified in our board's strategic plan is the development of a plan that lays out a pathway to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. This means by 2050, our community and the county's operations would contribute no additional greenhouse gas pollution. While this is a long-term goal, it is clear that Oregon has already seen some of the effects of changing climate, with the latest example being the scope and destruction of the fall's wildfires. And so the project will also identify opportunities for our community to adapt and prepare for climate change impacts to become more resilient. Why should you care? Climate change is something that will directly or indirectly impact almost every aspect of Clackamas County as a community. It will similarly impact the way that we and our partner agencies operate and the way that we serve our community. Many departments within our organization and partners in our community have a role to play in promoting a transition to a carbon neutral community. Climate action and our carbon footprint are issues of concern for economic development, forestry, stormwater and wastewater, land use, transportation, disaster management, finance, procurement, public health, housing, education, agriculture, and food systems, even criminal justice. I'd like to ask Evan Polk, Supervisor for the County Sustainability and Solid Waste Program, to say a bit more about the project, where we're headed, and introduce the consultants. With that, Evan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dan. Once the Board of Commissioners called for a plan to bring us to carbon neutral by 2050, we set about developing a scope of work with input from the board, staff from several departments, and with support as well from Portland State University's Institute for Sustainable Solutions. It was important to define what success looks like, so I'd like to briefly summarize the criteria laid out for a successful plan with support from the board. Next slide, please. So we want this climate action plan to be meaningful. In other words, it should have implementable, measurable goals and actions that will place our community on a path to becoming carbon neutral. We want it to be data-driven, which means we want to be informed by the best available science and the data about our community and the effects and benefits of mitigation and adaptation actions. We want it to be integrated, meaning that strategies that come out of the plan are embedded and institutionalized in the work of the county's departments and strategic plans and policies. We want it to be transparent and accountable with community access into plan development and implementation. We want it to be coordinated, meaning that we recognize the interdisciplinary nature of resilience and carbon reduction as we develop an approach where we and partners work together. We want it to enable early action. We want it to be equitable. In other words, inclusive and sharing the benefits of climate action widely and engaging and accounting for those in the community who may be disproportionately impacted and or have less opportunity to advocate for their own interests. Finally, we want it to be supported in that we've identified the resources needed to implement the plan. So in the midst of the COVID pandemic earlier this year, we were pleased to receive strong proposals from 10 firms that wanted to help us develop this plan. The review team representing staff from Health, Housing and Human Services, Transportation and Development, and Public and Government Affairs selected Sustainability Solutions Group. SSG and their team bring some innovative analytical tools that can help us find actions that have meaningful economic, health or livability benefits. They have compelling prior experience in communities that have both urban and rural identities. And they have a passion for building consensus by bringing together people who don't typically work together or may not even like each other to identify creative solutions to tough problems. So our overarching goal over the next 12 months is to identify how we can best meet the long-term transformative goal of eliminating the county's carbon footprint by 2050. Jeremy Murphy with SSG and Monica Cuneo with CoCreative will now provide an overview of the project as it is scheduled to unfold and introduce other members of their consulting team as they see fit. Jeremy?
Great, thanks so much, Evan. It's a fantastic introduction. Monica and I will tell you a little bit about our companies, and then we will give you an overview of the process that we'll go through to create the climate action plan for Clackamas County. SSG and our modeling partners, What If Technologies, have a very robust modeling methodology and climate action planning process approach. We're about 40 people altogether, and we have a variety of different disciplines, which really give us a very holistic approach to this sort of work. We've done a lot of plans for large urban centers, as well as more rural areas, and as well as mixed areas. So as Evan was pointing out, our experience is well suited to the task ahead with Clackamas County. Monica, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm here representing CoCreative Consulting, and we support diverse collaborations from local, rural networks to global networks, addressing really a very wide range of social issues and challenges. We are currently supporting 24 multi-stakeholder collaborations that are working across this huge range of issues in the areas of sustainability, social equity, shared prosperity. And what we do is help people work effectively across organizational, sectoral, and political boundaries to change complex systems. And just like Evan said, even when they may not know each other or even like each other. We also provide training and capacity building to people who are also leading leading collaborations for systemic change. And we provide all of our methods, tools, and materials for free. So feel free to check us out.
And I think as we go through the presentation here, hopefully you'll see a lot of these topics that you have just listed off in input. So off the top, we're developing a climate action plan here. We have a very data-driven approach to it, where we have all of the energy and emissions data, all of the assumptions around the future pathways of things like populations and employments and fuel use and housing and land use over the next 30 years. I'll show you in the upcoming slides kind of how we treat some of that data, the scenario modeling that we do with it. And we do all of that to achieve an emissions reduction target. And the actual plan itself will consist of a lot of contextual information. What is the climate context in Clackamas County right now, and what is it expected to be, as well as what we can do about that. So the energy and emissions scenario modeling that we'll perform, we will do a lot of back and forth with the public, with subject matter experts, with different stakeholders, to kind of get input and get a sense of priorities for actions. It will develop those policies and actions with everyone's input. And we'll also not only establish what the policies and actions for the plan should be, but also what their high-level financial implications will be. So we have a good idea of kind of what the costs are likely to be and what the avoided costs and savings are likely to be as well. And of course, to make it all work, in the end, a plan is just a plan without an implementation framework. So we'll also be developing an implementation framework as part of the climate action plan so that we know who is involved in the implementation of it, where the funding is coming from, and what the timing of all the actions will be. So these are all the different components that we can expect to develop over the coming months for the climate action plan. So the plan development has 6 main phases, the decarbonization phases. So we're doing the preparatory work now, where we're collecting all the data, where we're setting up our engagement planning, and we're also doing the inventory. So the energy and emissions inventory, all the census data, we're gathering all of that, and we're calibrating our models with it that we bring to this process. The third step is target setting. In this case, a target has already been set, as Dan mentioned, the net zero by 2050 target. But we'll kind of be exploring what that target means in terms of the scenario and actions in the fourth phase. The scenario and actions that are anticipated to be needed, to be required to achieve those targets. Once we've established what those the actions are, once we've run the scenarios, once we've compared the different paths that we can take, we will get into the plan creation into phase 5 and figure out the implementation and financing of it. And of course, to see how we're doing over the long term, over plan implementation year over year, we'll establish a monitoring and evaluation program so that we know what data to collect going forward, and we know if we're succeeding or not quite meeting our targets in future years. So here are the modeling phases. So there's a lot of technical work that goes on in this project. We're currently in the data collection phase here. We're calibrating what's known as the base year. So we have base year data for 2019, all the census data, population, employment, number of homes, number of vehicles, etc., and all of the energy use throughout the county in buildings, in transportation, what is also emissions created by water use, solid waste, liquid waste generation. We're collecting all of that and putting it into the model, calibrating our models so that we can do our scenario modeling correctly. So we have a lot of inputs. And we will get a few outputs. So we'll have our GHG, our energy and emissions inventory once all the modeling is set up. We'll generate a manual for how all of that data is treated, all of the assumptions that go into the modeling. And using that manual, we will create what is known as the business as usual scenario. And that's where Clackamas County is headed in terms of energy emissions across all of those sectors I mentioned, out to the year 2050, our target year, where we have our net zero emissions target. We'll generate alternative paths. We'll model those scenarios, and we'll test different actions and different policies to see what it takes to get to the net zero target. And once we have a good mix of policies and actions that we've tested through the modeling, we'll generate our low carbon scenario. And that is really the crux of the climate action plan content. It will describe the different actions, the different policies, what the energy and emissions impacts will be, and what their implementation looks like. Once we refine all those actions, we will get our action plan, and from there we'll do the implementation framework and the monitoring plan as well. And of course, along the course of all this technical work that's happening, there's a lot of different engagement inputs that happen. So, we'll get input on what our business as usual trajectory looks like. We'll get input on what the different policies and actions are that we should be considering. And we'll get input on, the financial inputs, financial modeling outputs, and other considerations, so that when we get to the final plan, we've all kind of created it together, and we can feel confident in its implementation. So those are the modeling phases. I'll show you a few examples of what the outputs will look like for Clackamas County from some other projects that we've done. So here are a graph of different emissions scenarios for a city that we worked with. And so you can see to the left of the graph, it's the historical emissions, and then the yellow line is your business as usual emissions trajectory. In this case, emissions are declining for a little while until around 2030, but then as population increases in this city, as more vehicles are used, as more homes are made, as more energy is used, more emissions are generated, and it starts to increase again. And so this city was interested in 3 different scenario investigations. So they had high ambition, low carbon scenario, and they had a 1.5 degrees and a 2 degrees target scenario, which are scenarios that come from the Paris Climate Agreement targets. And so ultimately this city went with the 1.5 degrees scenario, which was a very ambitious program for actions and policies to implement across their community. So we'll see one of the, we'll see a variety of these types of emissions line graphs as we generate the modeling outputs as we go through the project. Oh, did we skip one there, Monica? This one. So this is a more nuanced version of the graph that we just showed, which shows the emissions reductions effect of every single action that we will model on the project in generating the plan. So you can see how we go from our current year, or 2019, our reference year on the left-hand side of the graph, through to 2050 on the right-hand side of the graph, and our target emissions reduction level, all the colorful wedges that get us down from where we are expected to go in the reference scenario and where we want to go for the target emissions reductions level, and the emissions reduction potential of each of the actions that we'll be considering and modeling. And then what's left, the gray underneath all the colorful wedges, the remaining carbon liability, we're trying to crush that down as quickly and as much as possible and out until the year 2050. So we'll see a graph like this as well when we generate all of our modeling outputs. You go to the next one, please. Yes. So another great feature of our modeling is that it is all spatially oriented. So all of the energy considerations, all of the emissions considerations that we have in the modeling are also mapped. So we've divided Clackamas County up into a variety of traffic zones, and we're using those zones in the mapping modeling outputs. So here's an example from another city, which has divided up the city into all these different traffic zones. And this is a build as planned or business as usual map of buildings emissions versus a low carbon map of buildings emissions in the year 2050. And so you can see zone per zone where the emissions reductions have happened across the entire city in each of those zones or each of those neighborhoods. So you can see the effects that are anticipated through the action and policy implementations that we're considering in the plan development. So this is a really fun and interactive way when we make it live on the website, where you can kind of go to your neighborhood, see what your emissions are currently in your neighborhood, and then see what they're likely to be under plan implementation 10 or 20 or 30 years from now. And so we'll have lots of different maps like this, not just for buildings, but also for transportation and other elements of the plan. Okay, what do we have next? The financial modeling outputs. So here's one example of the financial assessment that we'll do. This is for another city that we worked with, where they had lots of renewable energy generation goals, and so lots of the actions centered around renewable energy. It required a lot of investment, so you can see above the x-axis here are the blue bars are the costs or the investments required, and below the x-axis, the horizontal axis, are all of the avoided costs or savings or revenues that are all resultant from the actions taken. So you can see that on average, year over year, between 2020 and 2050 for this plan, it's about $200 million worth of investment that's happening. That's not just from the city here, or would be the county in this project's case. It's the collective investment from business, from homeowners, from vehicle owners, from schools and institutions, as well as the municipality. So $200 million a year on average for a lot of these years. But then you see how, in this case, the avoided costs through things like operations and maintenance savings with more efficient and simpler electric systems versus older fossil fuel systems, which require a lot of operations and maintenance by comparison. Lots of savings there. Or energy cost savings through increased energy efficiency in homes, increased electrification of vehicles, which are more efficient and use less energy. There's a lot of cost savings associated with that. The carbon price credit, we're avoiding paying taxes, carbon taxes, as we become more energy efficient. And the revenues in this case from all of the renewable energy that was implemented, bringing in a lot of revenues for homeowners who had it on their homes, for the municipality who was partnering with utilities to generate energy locally and recoup the investments via the revenues from that generation. So we'll have a lot of financial considerations output along the length of this project. This will be one of those. One important feature of this graph that you may notice is the trend line, the net annual costs and savings. So although there is a lot of investments that occur throughout the length of this 30-year period, you can see that in about 2026, 2027, there's a break-even point that happens. And after that, we're well into the net savings on the implementation of these actions. All right. I think we have another finances graph here, which makes it a little more relatable to the homeowner and the vehicle owner. These are household energy costs for a city that we worked with. These are the annual energy expenditures, so year over year, between 2019 and 2050. And you can see in 2019, it's about $800 million, I should say, across the whole community for household energy costs. And under regular circumstances, by 2050, that energy cost is increasing by about $100 million. So in 2050, it's $900 million annual energy costs across the whole community. But implementing the actions and policies in their climate action plan, it's estimated that annual energy cost will be almost half in 2050. So there's a $500 million difference between not doing anything, just kind of continuing the way they're going, or implementing all of the energy efficiency and energy cost savings of the plan that was developed. So that translates to substantial savings per household. If you do a per capita calculation on that, it's often on our projects in the realm of 50% to 75% savings in household energy costs. So it's substantial. Okay, I think that's it for our financial information, but one other thing that we do for the modeling with our data and our financial considerations is employment. So we're interested in how many jobs are created locally through the implementation of the actions that are developed for the climate action plan. So we have our suite of actions that we've developed with all the public input and all the subject matter expert input. We've estimated what their energy and emissions savings will be. We've estimated how much they'll cost to implement and how much the savings will be from their implementation. And we'll also estimate what type of employment is expected in their implementation. So for this example, you can see renewable energy, the big green bars year over year, lots of renewable energy going into this community and lots of person years of employment being created, thousands of person years of employment over the course of these 30 years. Similarly, the other big employment generator in this example is residential building retrofits. So making residential buildings more energy efficient creates a lot of local jobs. We need a lot of people to rapidly transition the housing stock to do those energy efficiency retrofits. So the employment modeling helps give us an idea of the benefit of all of these actions to the local economy and the employment generation potential. Okay, so that is a very quick rundown of a lot of different technical aspects of the modeling that we'll be doing in this project. Over the course of the project, you can expect to see a lot of these types of graphs, a lot of these types of outputs from our modeling process. And you'll also be giving a lot of inputs to the assumptions that go into the modeling that generate these sorts of outputs.
You ready, Jeremy, for me to take it away?
I am.
Okay, passing the baton. So how are we going to collect all of this great input that Jeremy alluded to collecting to be able to develop the community context, to develop the variables to put into the technical analyses? So I'm going to share our community engagement approach and our thinking right now as we are continuing to engage with stakeholders and develop the work. So I want to zoom out real quick. I'm sure many of you have heard of the term a wicked problem, and that even that climate change is considered a wicked problem. And in the context of this visual, it's, in other terms, it's a complex problem, meaning that there's really no simple prescriptive recipe that will untangle the complexity of climate change or the approach to climate action. There isn't a formula, however complicated and specific, that can be applied. And instead, it's very complex. There is, meaning that there is not a recipe or formula. There's no one suite of experience or expertise that will guarantee our success. And really, this is because the problem definition and how it manifests really looks different depending on your perspective, or where you are, or who you are, and what your view of the issue and potential solutions look like. It also means that there's no single organization that can uniquely solve climate change, no matter how powerful or how large they might be. And there's no single program or policy that alone can change it. It's really the combination of several efforts, several participants, several sectors, and several views, creating also a complex and multi-layered and place-based response. So we're building our engagement approach to really embrace this complexity and to leverage the many voices and views, even when divergent, within Clackamas County to create a representative and powerful plan that reaches across sectors, across political views and community experiences. So, like I said in my introduction, we really embrace divergence, and we're no stranger to working with groups that hold diverse and divergent viewpoints. And in fact, we appreciate the differences and intentionally call them in through several tools and methods. We consider the success of our work to be measured by our ability to create plans for networks and collaborations that are meaningful and relevant to the stakeholders and community members who will implement the work and or be impacted by it. So we really look at these key elements as guiding our work, building common ground and understanding, framing issues, and this means framing issues and options using values and interests and lived experiences rather than positions or specific policies, to really maximize finding that common ground and a shared vision of what's possible. Like I've mentioned, we expect differences and welcome tension actually as a tool for better thinking and refinement. And like I said, we've used several tools to be able to call that in and leverage it. We work to create safe atmospheres that engender trust and understand and address cultural characteristics and values that are unique to communities and to your community, using an equity approach that acknowledges and really works to mitigate barriers to participation and ensures representation and inclusion. And then designing engagement with inclusion in mind for people of diverse backgrounds, education, and issue experience. This means that we're making information easily digestible, translating science, using visual translation as much as possible, as well as, as we're in this era of, or age of virtual engagement, how we can design conversations and community conversations that really increase participation and engage people. We also provide multiple modes of engagement. So we'll talk a little bit more about what we're thinking, and then ensure that we're building collaborative capacity. So being really clear about the purpose of why we're engaging in any particular, with any particular group, and along the stage of the project, the phases of the project, how the information will be gathered, and providing backstops and parameters for folks that we're engaging with on a more ongoing basis, which I'll unpack in a sec. So these are the key strategies that we're using, and we're thinking we will be using for our community engagement. And right now we're really utilizing them as virtual engagement methods and tools. And the idea, I wanted to express visually here that there is a timing and an order of operations to several of these pieces, and there will be happening, some of them will be happening simultaneously. And the intent is for them to be iterative and to be feeding and informing each other. So I'm going to move to the next slide, actually, and I can show you how the engagement tools will unfold. So this is a mashup of what are the technical decisions or the points that Jeremy was referring to when we need to collect information, feedback, ideas, buy-in, and support from various community stakeholder groups. So right now we are in the first few months of the project. So we're still in this pre-engagement phase where we're conducting subject matter expert interviews, as well as subjects being the cultural context of Clackamas County. And we're drafting the community engagement plan and starting to recruit community advisory task force members. That community advisory task force will be launched in late January, early February. And so when you see the CATF throughout this timeline, they're really seen as the ongoing group of people that represent the sectors that we know need to shape the decisions and the formation of the plan, as well as inform pathways for implementation, because they will be some of the sectors and industries that will either be implementing or will feel the effects of implementation. So after the Community Advisory Task Force is established, which will be in the next month or two, we will also establish subcommittees. These are topic-specific subcommittees that will provide the deep dive expertise that we need on various topics. Moving along then to the external engagement after Community Advisory Task Force 4. So this is happening in about late spring, June-ish, is when we will employ some of the other engagement tactics, like the cross-sector listening sessions and focus groups. Now, all throughout this process, there will be communications like e-newsletters, information sharing, opportunities to weigh in via surveys on social media, And all of that will be woven in and reflected back to the CATF to inform and test the decisions along the way. In that external engagement period is when we will be taking those draft actions and implementation pathways essentially to the streets and getting a broader base of feedback to then bring back to the CATF and to our project team to refine the plan based on what we have been hearing. So just as a process update, like I said, we're in this pre-engagement phase. We've held 7 out of 16 interviews. We are starting to build out the list for the community advisory task force and draft the community engagement plan. So all of December will be a strong focus on 3, 4, and 5 in preparation for convening that community advisory task force, like I said, in late July, early February. So I'm going to kick this one back to Jeremy.
Yeah, I can talk about the key deliverables. So we talked a little bit at the beginning what a climate action plan involves. And for this project process, these will be the specific deliverables that will come out of it. The first 2 documents that we'll develop are technical investigation documents. There is one for context and one for the climate profile. So the context being all those things that I talked about in terms of the climate conditions that are existing now in Clackamas County and that are expected to exist in the future. All of the buildings, transportation, waste, etc., all of the context that is relevant to the work that we're doing on the project here. And then the second will be the climate profile, which is the business as usual modeling outputs. So where Clackamas County is expected in terms of its energy and emissions and other climate characteristics over the next 30 years or so. So we'll have those 2 documents as our foundation. We'll go through all the public engagement elements that Monica just ran through. We'll through the technical and the engagement processes, we'll get our emissions reductions actions developed, and our net zero pathway modeling can occur. Once we've done that scenario modeling analysis, we'll do our financial analysis as I discussed, and once we've done all of the technical investigations and we've taken it all back to the public throughout the process and gotten all of the inputs and the refinements, then we'll be ready to generate the climate action plan. And that will be the collection of all of the information in the first 4 points of the key deliverables, as well as the detailed explanations of the policies and actions to be undertaken. We'll develop a climate lens as well, which I don't think we've mentioned before in this presentation, but the climate lens will be a tool that the county can use for decision making. It will be a kind of a filter that different decisions can be run through to see if they are meeting the climate objectives of the climate action plan. And then, of course, we'll have our implementation plan and monitoring strategy so that we know what to expect in terms of the needs for implementing the plan, as well as how we're all doing as we implement the plan and what we need to modify going forward so that we can be successful. So those are our 7 kind of key deliverables that we'll be developing over the next several months with your help and the help of others as well. And so we're really excited about it. We've been quite excited to talk with the Clackamas County team, the staff, to figure out this project and to get it going. And we're really looking forward to working with you all on it.